Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you all and to have a conversation about middle mile networks and the role that they play in the overall broadband ecosystem. As they mentioned, my name is Alex Jeffrey. I'm Senior Policy Manager at Vernonberg Group. And for those of you who missed my fascinating and delightful keynote presentation yesterday, we are a consulting firm that focuses 100% on closing the digital divide. We work with governments and companies and nonprofits kind of on soup to nuts, from engineering and finance to policy advocacy. So without further ado, I'm going to get to the real reason you all are here, which are the fabulous people sitting to my left, and let them introduce themselves. So Greg, we will start with you.
My name is Greg Cotton. I'm a senior manager with Fujitsu in field and network sales engineering, focused mostly on customers, including state and local governments, utilities, transportation, helping them build broadband and middle mile networks.
Hi, I'm Nate Wallowitz. I'm the Regional Broadband Director for the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. We're a regional government located in the mountainous, rural Colorado area. We not only have a broadband program where since 2012 we've been advising local governments on how they can provide broadband access to their communities, but we also, starting in 2016, we started to pursue our own middle mile solution because the incumbents were not providing the resilience or the affordability that our communities needed to be able to get broadband widely distributed and make it affordable to consumers, schools, local governments, and public safety.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wilson. I'm Manager for Systems Engineering and Principal Architect for Ribbon Communications. My team focuses on the regional and rural service providers in the U.S., and we provide two types of solutions. We provide network transformation for next generation voice networks, and we also provide, more cogent to this conversation, IP and optical solutions targeted specifically at the middle mile.
Good afternoon. I'm Laurel Leverrier. I'm the Assistant Administrator of the Telecommunications Programs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. My programs primarily finance last mile infrastructure in rural communities, but middle mile access is critically important to the success of our projects. So it's something that we track really closely, and obviously our projects are really dependent on.
Hi there, I'm Joel Daly, Senior Vice President at Zayo. I run the government programs, and I also have an odd job. I run product strategy, but they're a little bit interrelated here, and I'll tell that as part of the story later on. We've been working, if you don't know who Zayo is, I can actually say that we won the Middle Mile Award today at lunch. Wow. Woo! And that's really for my team. That's not for me, but we're one of the largest independent communications infrastructure provider in the U.S. We do have operations in Europe, but primarily focus on North America. A few years back, we went to the leadership team and said, hey, we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in terms of all of the government funding that's going out there to upgrade the infrastructure. And oh, by the way, it also comes with a beautiful mission in terms of hitting unserved and underserved areas. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, and so I think we'll get right into the substance here. I think middle mile is really interesting because it's a term that people use all the time, and I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So as our first kind of level setting question, what does middle mile mean, and what is middle mile's role in kind of the overall broadband ecosystem? I'll open that up to anyone, although Joel, I think on our prep call, you were the one that had a really awesome analogy.
Yeah, I actually have to explain many times to my parents, what the heck do I do in life? And when I say I'm a communications infrastructure middle mile provider, they go, what is that? And so when I think about the definition of middle mile, I just kind of go back to the road systems. If you think about it, the last mile providers have to provide the local roads and the fiber to each one of the homes. But if those roads, local roads, do not connect to the highways or the interstate highways, then they're not going to be able to communicate to the outside world or get to those critical applications that the end users want. So a lot of times when I think about middle mile, I really think about the interstate highway that connects the end users to where all the critical applications that are in data centers, internet exchanges, and stuff like that.
Anything to add there, anybody, or we like that definition? Excellent.
Well, I think that's a strong definition, but I think one of the things we need to do also is make sure we say what middle mile is not, right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's not the interstate highway system, so it's not those critical applications, it's not the data centers. It's also not really part of the last mile or access networks, and it's not just access aggregation, but it's where we're able to provide some policy, some differentiation, and really be aware of the different services that are running across the network together, and to be able to handle those each with their own individual merits.
So to build on what Jeff's saying there, I think some key characteristics that are important to get out of the middle mile network, not only capacity, that Joel and Jeff both touched on, but redundancy, right? And that's, when the highway system shuts down, you can't just not get where you need to go, usually. There's detours, right? And so building and designing that middle mile network for redundancy and resiliency in face of, some sort of failure is an important step as well.
Awesome. And perfect. I think that gives us all a level playing field that we're operating on, which is really helpful. And so yesterday, the focus of the conference was on BEAD, and in BEAD, we talk a lot about the last mile and what percent of the population needs to be connected over that last mile. Where is the United States in terms of its middle mile infrastructure? Like, how does that compare to the last mile need? How does the coverage compare? How does the capacity and the future-proofness and the resiliency of the networks compare to what we're designing and working to build with BEAD in the last mile?
Well, I will say one thing in terms of, and look at this, not self-serving. We need more of it in terms of middle mile. After we won the awards, of the initial NTIA awards, Senator Wyden invited me out because he goes and does town hall meetings. And we were in Fossil, Oregon, and we walked to the little community center, and kids came in and were telling the story of how they got to go to the community center in order to get internet, in order to do their schoolwork. Now, my kids are a little spoiled. They grew up in Boulder, Colorado, with all the internet and all the phones and everything else, but it just was very touching in terms of the lack of infrastructure that really does exist throughout the country.
I would say as far as middle mile goes, though, we don't have a perfect footprint, definitely. We need to get it out there, but I would say middle mile as far as footprint, probably we have pretty good coverage. The thing that we need to look at for middle mile now with trying to get broadband out there and trying to get all these newer services is we need to make sure that it has enough capacity, enough resiliency, as Greg brought up, and really is built for the future of what the internet is going to be. So not built like the networks that were built 20 and 30 years ago, which is a lot of what's out there, but what's really going to be going forward for the next 10, 15, and 20 years, which is going to be markedly different than what we built originally.
Can we say future-proof technology? Is that too much of a buzzword? But yeah, with that
it's
growth,
not wrong.
With that growth in mind, I think is maybe a better way to phrase it. Yeah.
And I think another good point is there are many places especially across our more rural communities, where there's middle mile that exists, but access to that middle mile by other organizations, because it's privately owned, is a bit of a challenge. It's one thing if you're trying to deploy a network and the incumbent fiber providers are saying, oh yeah, sure, we can sell you a circuit. Well, selling somebody a circuit on a monthly basis versus providing dark fiber to a network that really needs dark fiber to really provide for the needs of capacity now and in the future, there's a difference there, and I think that it's important to just point that out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, I think the other side of the coin is from a BEAD planning perspective, from a middle mile perspective, all these broadband offices are working on these BEAD plans that are designed to permanently close the coverage gap and truly close the availability gap in the United States. What do they need to be thinking about from a middle mile perspective as they're working to design these programs? And have you all seen, through the BEAD program and through other funding available, is there enough funding to close middle mile gaps and to get us in a position where our middle mile networks can support all these new advanced applications and all the higher capacity needs that we have?
Well, I think certainly most of the federal funding, at least to date, has been focused more on the last mile. I mean, you do see Commerce has a middle mile program, and there's some other approaches to that too. But I would just say for the states that are looking at BEAD, definitely assessing your middle mile capacity in your state is going to be really critical. What we see at USDA is access to middle mile in the community, as well as it being affordable. Sometimes the prices, depending on how many options you have, can really differ, and they can have a really drastic impact on the actual cost of your last mile deployment. And so that's definitely something that, you know, we recommend that states really consider, because again, the cost of a last mile project, whether you're going to have to extend service to get to there in order to make your last mile network work, or just the cost for them to have that middle mile network, can really drive up your overall cost.
I would say that probably we need more funding for middle mile projects. There's only so much middle mile. There's only so much that's accessible, and for the last mile to be successful, you need good, solid, reliable middle mile, plus the additional circuits and the additional fiber paths for resilience as you move forward. I spent a few hours yesterday on Capitol Hill meeting with some of our legislative staff from Colorado, and when I brought up the question of middle mile and talked about middle mile, they said, yeah, we're hearing things about middle mile, like maybe there needs to be more funding. So they're already hearing it on the Hill. So
is it possible then that the KPI in the past has been coverage, right? You know, how many people are covered, and we need to have our legislators understand some new KPIs with respect to capacity, resiliency, and increasing that middle mile?
I mean, I also think, just speaking anecdotally, you know, I said in my talk yesterday, and something I've heard as somebody who's done kind of like out in the community public engagement BEAD type work, affordability is the next crisis in broadband. And so middle mile, easy, affordable access to middle mile as a tool for improving affordability in the last mile is also something that's really, really interesting, and just shows how critical a component of the ecosystem it is, I think.
Yeah, matter of fact, thinking about when I kind of put it into perspective, I got the opportunity to work on some fiber to the home projects. And I know every project's a little bit different, but if we're talking about the broadband directors, how do you think about this? When you do a fiber to the home implementation, 85% of the costs, rightfully so, goes to connect each one of those homes. But there's still around 10 to 15% that needs to be allocated for middle mile. And so, some of the things that we're seeing, because we get to work across multiple states, is some states are saying, hey, we've got some decent infrastructure. We'll see how the last mile providers are going to connect in what's there. But there's other states out there, and we're working on a project with Nevada, in which they're coming back in and saying, hey, for that 15%, we still have to run a state network. And working with the DOT, is there anything that we can do so there's not wasted costs by each of the individual providers trying to figure out their own middle mile solution? We're seeing that as a theme that's emerging across different states, but that's one of the pieces that are out there to kind of look at.
And something, kind of building on this question is, and in the service of additional affordability is, what strategies have you all seen that are effective or what would you like to see middle mile providers doing to lower their deployment and operating costs and then to pass those savings on to last mile providers and consumers? Like, how can we make middle mile deployment more efficient, I guess we'll say?
I think a big key, or several big keys of this, is number one, if you're going to build a new network, build a new network. Don't try to build a higher capacity version of what you built before. There have been a lot of technological developments around transport, around networking over the last 5 to 10 years that are really changing a lot of the assumptions that originally went into in a network build. So make sure that you're using, the current technology, the current assumptions to build out that network to be as efficient as possible. Secondly, look toward the future and the things that are going to happen, whether it's going to be what services am I offering next. I know this morning in the keynote they were talking about moving the bar on what broadband meant from I want to say it was 10 meg to 100 meg or something, or actually 100 meg to gig downstream. And so look for those kind of things and those growth, but also there are going to be things out there that are going to get us, like we talked about aging workforce this morning. What's going to happen when that goes along? Other technology things like IPv6, where does that come in? Make sure you plan those things in, but then on the other side of that, don't plan in corner cases. Corner cases are very expensive. So when you have somebody who says we can buy this and do this, make sure that it's going to pay for itself. But I think the biggest thing, and I've heard this quote a couple times, is digital transformation is going to create organizational transformation. So make sure you're moving your organization in that direction as well as your network.
And one of the possible roles that I see, and states and regional governments could be very helpful in this, is, okay, fine. Company A and Company B are going to build middle mile fiber. Okay. Why can't they work together? And let's coordinate the deployment so that we can get double the number of paths for the cost, and we get everybody into the same trench, and we just account for it once. That way everybody is in, everybody can be served, and all the providers of middle mile then each have a fair chance and a fair shot to gain access in a competitive way to each of the markets along the fiber path.
Yeah, to build on what Jeff was saying about the newest technology, and even when Nate, looping back to what he was saying before about, this selling a circuit versus selling dark fiber to the end mile. The new technology enables things like an open access network where you can now sell a wavelength, right, which is now a subdivision of that dark fiber, but it does allow that end user to upgrade that wavelength over time without having to go back to increase the circuit size. So I think that's some really exciting things we're seeing that's, again, developed just in the last few years.
And we're seeing that be very successful on our network. We have 7 separate ISPs on our network, utilizing our network to serve multiple communities across our region.
The only other stuff I'd add is, the whole mission here is to enable the last mile provider. We have to hit those end users. So anything that we can do to reduce the costs really is the mission. And there's a couple of neat things, like, hey, you want to go back for more budget. People are nervous, like, what happens when I run out of budget or this particular grant? Some of the creative stuff that we're doing is revenue shares between public and private to make it self-funded after, so that if you did want to expand, you ain't got to look for other budget to go do it. I think that's very interesting, and it's been fascinating because this is working both on the working on the private side and the public side to kind of meet in the middle in terms of the right contract structure. I think is extremely creative.
Yeah, I think. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that I do think, to your point about affordability and middle mile, I don't think there's so much understanding, at least with the, in government where I work, but it is so interconnected, not just with the cost of the initial build for a last mile provider, but those ongoing costs that they have for access to that middle mile. So, and that has a direct impact in that affordability piece for the end user. In a lot of the areas where we're trying to get service to, there is not a lot of customers to make up, which is why you see access in a lot of urban and suburban communities right before it gets out to the more rural communities. So again, I just think there's such a direct connection to so much of the cost of these networks. And to your point, our goal is to get everybody connected. And there's just really critical pieces all around affordability that relate to middle mile.
And I'll just add one more point. The other funding challenge that you see is, okay, great, we've got the CapEx, we're building fiber.
Yeah.
What about the OpEx? Yeah. Who's going to pay the OpEx, and how do you make that work? Because if you have fiber in the ground, but then there's not enough funding, because rural fiber, especially middle mile, the business case, there's a reason that people aren't building it. The business case is not fantastic. So how do you manage that? And should we also look at potentially look at funding vehicles that also include OpEx as well? It's great if it's there, if we future-proof it. Jeff, from a technology point of view, that's fantastic. But if we can't continue to provide ongoing funding for operating it, whatever time period in the future happens, and you can't afford to operate it anymore, then the end users and the community loses.
100%. I mean, I think that is also, that's a concern even in the last mile for BEAD, is how is the OpEx going to work out? At least we've now touched the third rail of Universal Service Fund reform while we're on the panel, so we've covered all our bases here. But yeah, no, it's absolutely a really strong point, and I think to your point, Nate, there's a lot of power in government's role at both the local level, the state level, and the federal level as a convener and as a clearinghouse, and as making sure that middle mile is being deployed in the most efficient possible way, and we're making the most use of the already limited middle mile funds we've got. I want to open it up to questions if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I have some more that I can keep running through. But yes, I wanted to open it up. Yeah, absolutely.
So the discussion only revolves around fiber as it relates to middle mile. I was wondering, what about wireless options for middle mile?
Yeah, I can tell you that, when we applied for our grants and when we look at our solutions, we actually went in with a tower partner as part of our solution, because the whole case was just economically, it does not make sense to have fiber everywhere. I'm a fiber provider. It's insane. If you have a community of maybe 200, there are better technologies that are out there that can be applied. So as part of some of the BEAD stuff, especially some of the states are going back for the non-deployment fund section of their grant and looking at both, fixed wireless and middle mile type solutions that are out there. So definitely part of the solution, because it makes a whole boatload of sense, especially from a money standpoint.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about rural communities. I mean, that's why I think, to your point, it's easier to think about middle mile from just a logistic, like, you know, it makes sense what that road looks like. But you're right, there are other options for middle mile, and especially when we're getting to those rural communities, leveraging those other options, I think, makes a lot of sense in order to get to everybody. And there's some really good options today in terms of what you can do and the type of bandwidth we're seeing that they're being able to provide.
100%.
I think there was one right here in the middle.
The business case for the middle mile, where does the revenue come from for a middle mile operator? Are they relying on local access, final mile ISPs to purchase capacity on the middle mile? Is that where they're getting their revenue from?
No, most of the revenue comes, and if you look at us being a middle mile provider, especially on, you know, the commercial side, we have very large customers that really want to go from one metro to another metro. So they're passing through that middle mile. Now, traditionally in the past, what we didn't do is create exit ramps. We wanted the express lane that just went between metros because the big customers want to go as fast as possible. So as part of our solution, the solutions that are coming up with today, and it's been a long, I finally learned the definition of milk runs. So basically, you have your express lane, it came from the railroads, and then you have a separate set of fiber and tracks and you provide exit ramps so that you can hit these rural communities. And so we can get money from our traditional customers on the express lanes, but also service these rural areas and these local ISPs.
And that's exactly the way we've engineered our network. We have what we call an express path and a community access path. And from a regional government perspective, we're organized as a co-op today. So our cooperative partners on the networks, who are local governments, hospital districts, rural electric co-ops, they are our anchors, and they provide most of the OpEx for the network. In addition to that, we sell bandwidth to ISPs, either in wavelengths or in Ethernet circuits, depending on what their needs are. And we use those because we're government. We're not in the business of actually turning a profit and returning 50% back to headquarters of all the revenues. So we take that money back in, and we actually use that to help reduce the ongoing costs that our anchor partners have on an annual basis for supporting the network. So their contributions are reduced every year the more commercial circuits we sell.
I know I think we only had one more question. Can we sneak it in? I think we maybe can. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Johnny, National Telephone Association. I need to ask, since it's a great new world, Connex have got record amounts of money to build out networks across the nation. What's your advice for tribes when they build middle mile? Not very many of them will build it, but some will. So, since it's a great new world, what advice you have for them from best experiments that you coached it?
So I think, I'll let jump in a second, but to me, the experience we've seen is picking the right partners. It's always easier to say in hindsight, right? But especially since this is a brave new world, picking the right partner is really, really important. And you know, this is a good example of some experts up here that are maybe not the only ones available, but I think that's the right move for the tribes, is to go find somebody to consult with them and help guide them in that process.
And I'll provide one example of Colorado to wrap it up. In Southwest Colorado, the state and the local governments that are surrounding the tribal lands are all cooperating together, and the tribe and the local communities have come together to build out the middle mile so that they are cost sharing all of that to help not only support the local communities surrounding the tribal lands, but also definitely primary mission, also support the tribes.
That is super helpful. And with that, our time is up, but I'm sure all the panelists would be open to connecting with anyone. Thank you so much for your attention and being such a wonderful audience, and we will see you later.